Bible. 7 minutes in the Word of God. Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. It wasn't more than this. It wasn't less than this. It was exactly as God said. And that's why we don't add to the Word of God. We don't take away from the Word of God. When we read the Bible, when we know that God is speaking, we want to listen and we want to hear what it is that God is saying as opposed to what man is saying. Men will argue about what God has said, but they won't listen to what God is saying or what God has said. They'll argue whether he meant it or whether he meant something else. But the fact of the matter in Genesis chapter 1, verse 12, is that God said, or verse 11, is that God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. God said these things specifically. God said these things by design. God said these things, and there's nothing else that needs to be changed or rearranged about them. It is very simple. Let the earth bring forth grass. And God said it, and it was so. The herb yielding seed, and God said it, and it was so. The fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself. God said it, and it was so. These things upon the earth, and God said it, and it was so. The reason why it's stressed over and over again about what God said is because he wants to be heard. It's a simple fact of matter that what we're told is what he said, and what he said is what we're being told. There's no question of interpretation. There's no question about explanation. The Bible doesn't need to be explained, and the Bible doesn't need an interpreter. As a matter of fact, it's very clear what God has said if we're listening and we want to hear exactly what it is that he has said, as opposed to what we have said he said. Little children have no problem listening to the story. When you tell them a story, if you were standing around a campfire, you would say something very similar. It might be once upon a time, or in a faraway land, or a long, long time ago. But here in Genesis chapter 1, if you were teaching your children the Bible, you would say in verse 11, and God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. I like the fact that each part God said doesn't make any differentiation between any other situation or circumstance with which we need to add our own interpretation. If it says the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, then it's a fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself. If it's upon the earth, then it's upon the earth. And it was so. And it's interesting that the earth bring forth grass and the herb yielding seed. The grass and the herb yielding seed and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself. All of these have seed, and I like that. And God said, and it's very interesting that when he says these things, we find that not only was it so, but that it is so. And so, in the beginning, as we are looking at all of this, and we understand it by way of God telling us this, we know that God has done these things. We don't have to have some kind of class on how to defend God. God said it, and it was so. We don't have to pretend that there is a God. God said it, and it was so. We don't have to pretend, contend, or argue or debate for the faith. We don't need faith in order to know what God said. And because God said it, it's up to you to listen and to obey, or you're just making up excuses not to believe what God said. Because God is not mincing words or changing anything, he's making it very simple, very clear, and very direct. Then you have to say, when you get done with this, you have heard what God said. You know what God said. Because in VidDevoBible, in Genesis chapter 1, in verse 11, God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth," and it was so. And it is, because it's the word that you have heard. VidDevoBible, 7 minutes in the Word of God.